Hello. All right. Just spent a little while. I think I've got quite a good setup working. Let me know how the quality is. If there's any issues, just shout. I'm just gonna get on with it for now. Okay, so this is a little project which I'm just doing in a really short time frame. It's kind of a revival of an old game that I made called Confused Rogue, which I'll pull up really quick right now. You can download this on my itch.io. It's basically like a little game jam game that I did where you play as this guy here, and it's kind of a procedurally generated permadeath roguelike kind of thing, but it's just one-dimensional. So you have to get to the right, and you have to not get pushed to the left. But you have these three moves here which you can use. These three kind of like randomized set of actions. Each time you use one, it randomly gives you a different one in its place. So it's kind of like a little slot machine sort of thing, where you need to carefully sort of plan your moves ahead just based on a small set of available moves. So it's like super simple. I just made it in a couple of days, and just kind of shelved it a few years ago. But it's something which I thought was pretty cool, and there's probably some more I could do with it. So I'm just going to have a go at doing that now. So let's kill that. What I decided to do was change it to two-dimensional movement. So I figured. So I had this kind of image of the game in my head where you're trying to get from one side of the field to the other, one side of the level to the other, and I wanted this kind of feeling of like American football where you're trying to go and score like a touchdown, and there's all these enemies sort of piling in on you as you go. So it kind of naturally just became a sports game, which I would never set out to do. I never play sports games, but I think I can probably give it my own sort of unique twist. So this is a sports game set in a dungeon. I'm using an egg as a placeholder because I like eggs. And so the premise is that like these red things are like monsters, like orcs or something, which have locked up a bunch of slaves in a dungeon, and they sort of challenge them in this fatal blood sport just for fun because orcs are nasty. So each slave that comes up gets given the ball and just has to try and do a touchdown on the other side, and there's going to be a bunch of orcs in the way trying to kill him as violently as possible. So I've still got the same premise here of like three available moves, and these are randomized. But the difference is now it's not just limited to like a single path. You can move in and out as well on the Z-axis. So I can hit forward. I can now go like, so up and down represents angular, diagonal motion, like this, up. I can wait, of course, still, move up again, and if I keep going, I can get through like this. So, it's all completely turn-based in the rogue kind of style where you take a turn and then the enemies all take a turn. But it's staggered so that like each enemy moves one at a time. And I was really inspired by playing Into the Breach recently, which does some amazing stuff with turn-based systems. So enemies will all act in a very strict, specific order. So you can completely predict how things are going to play out. You know which enemy is going to move first. Oh, obviously, you don't right now. I haven't put any of that information in as visual feedback, but eventually you will be able to see which enemy is going to act first and in what order. You can also see here that enemies indicate what they're going to do on the next turn. So it's all like super simple placeholder art right now, but this kind of peg sticking out the front of this enemy right here indicates that he's going to move in this direction and he's going to end up on that tile in the next turn. So I know that I'm safe. I can wait on this tile and he's not going to hurt me, but he did move to there. So now if I were to move down, if I were to use this one, move down to this tile, once I've moved, this enemy is going to try to move here, and that means he's going to attack me. And right now it's just a one-hit kill, so I'm going to be dead. So I'll show you that really quick. I move there, boom, game over, done. So I'll restart. So it's pretty brutal and it's unforgiving, but you can, much like Into the Breach, you can use that to your advantage, or at least that's the goal. I'm still working on it, but you can kind of know very explicitly what enemies are going to do, and you can exploit their predictable behaviors. So for example, right now I can wait here. This guy's going to move into this tile. If I go forward, I'm going to get an attack in on him before he has a chance to move. So if he was facing towards me and he was going to attack me on the next turn, I could still kill him by getting my attack in first, like so. So let's keep going through. It's pretty easy right now. The enemies are all pretty dumb. But once I get to the other side, then I win. So it's just the bare bones I've got in right now of like the core loop of how to do a level, basically, like win and lose states. And I did this in a couple of days. I started at the weekend. So okay. Oh, I do have some music to it, which I forgot about that. I've got some music and some sound effects. It's pretty cool. It's from the same music pack that I used in Switch and Shoot by a Japanese musician called Moppy Sound. I don't know if I'll keep it. It's kind of placeholder for now, but it works. I'm actually gonna reduce the I'm gonna kill Skype for a start, because no one likes Skype. Gonna reduce the sound volume of Unity a little. Okay. So, I'll go over my setup a little bit first, just kind of give a quick rundown of what I've got in there. There's a few things which are just kind of self-explanatory, like I've got an audio manager, I've got a camera that uses a little script. In fact, what does that even do? Not a lot. Right now, I can just set the position at the start of the level. It uses Cinemachine to follow the player character. So So you see, like, if I move forward, it will try and like follow me and keep me roughly in the same place in the screen. There's an easier way to show that. Show the guides on the camera itself. So it's always trying to keep me like in this this kind of crosshair. It's tracking the player. Cinemachine is pretty cool. Pretty easy to use. Can get some really good results really quickly. So I highly recommend checking that out. That's free with Unity. So what else do I have on the camera? Then it's just a full screen shader effect for the to make it look like a retro PS1 game. That's the flashback post-processing plugin, which is also on the asset store. So most of the action happens on this object, which is my level manager. I found when I was working on Switch and Shoot that it's really beneficial to have just like one object in the scene which manages everything. So like whenever something major happens, this object gets notified, and then it can sort of speak out to all the other objects in the scene that it needs to send instructions to. So I call this my level manager. For the most part, it's kind of responsible for the phases, what I'm calling the phases of the level, so of the game. So like waiting for the player to click a button, when they click a button, waiting for them to perform that action, then sending it into the enemy turn, telling the enemies to act one by one through a list. So it's kind of like a really high level controller for everything in the level. Then I have a component called Enemy Manager, which is sort of responsible for sort of knowing where all the enemies are, or rather like who all the enemies are. I've got a list. Still in debug mode. It has just like a list of enemies, and when I hit play, that gets populated. So this script will spawn a bunch of enemies in their random positions, add them all to a list, and then kind of iterate through them when it's their turn to act. Then so we have the field script. So this is responsible for the actual the level layout itself. I'm calling it a field just in keeping with the sort of sports theme. So you notice like in the scene here, there's not really anything in the level. It's just a big plane. But when I hit play, if I pause it straight away, oops, you see that. It's over here. Camera is in a different position. So basically, like I can define the length and the width of the field in a number of tiles, and it will just instantiate a bunch of tiles. So they're all just messy in the hierarchy right now. I'll probably tidy that up later. So yeah, the field is kind of it's aware of. Well, actually, it's really important, this object, this component, because it keeps a 2D array of all the tiles in the field, and it knows what is on that tile. So this 2D array will be the same length, same on both dimensions as the length and the width of the field, and it will start out by being null on every entry, and then as enemies get spawned, where is that? Set up enemies. Yeah, so every time we spawn an enemy, we place them into the 2D array and say that enemy exists at these grid coordinates. So that way we have a constant reference. We have well, for one thing, we know exactly which tiles are free and which ones are not free, and secondly, if they're not free, we know what's on that tile, and that is using a base class called GPI, Gameplay Ingredient, and enemy inherits from that. So any kind of general object, which is what GPI is. Hello, hello. Okay, if it's going way over your head, I'll pare it back a bit. But I'll just kind of recap or finish off what I was going with there. The enemy class inherits from the GPI class. So this is like a general kind of catch-all script for any interactive or dynamic object, and then an enemy is a type of that. So okay, so we set up the enemies, we kind of store them in the grid, and then at any point we can kind of we can check, like when the player wants to move, we can check that field component and ask it, is that where is it? Is that tile vacant? And if it is, we return true. So like when the player clicks forward, for example, it's going to look up this tile on the 2D array, and if it's vacant, then the player can move onto it. And if not, then the player will attack whatever's there. Cool. All right. I think for the most part that's all the field script does right now, but eventually it's going to be extended so that there's kind of information about the state of each tile. Right now I just know what's on the tile, but there's going to be some more important information I need to know, like if an enemy intends to move onto a tile, I don't want another enemy to try to move onto that tile in the same turn, because then they'll just end up killing each other, which you can notice they do sometimes do like that. So this enemy tried to move onto a tile that another enemy was already on. In some situations I want that to happen. I want enemies to be able to kill each other, because that's a really cool way of letting the player sort of screw them over. Into the Breach does that really well, where you can nudge or push enemies by a tile or by one or more tiles, and you can see that. So one enemy is going to attack a certain square, and another enemy is near that square. You can push the second enemy into it, and the first enemy will then attack them on their turn. So you can use enemies to attack each other. So I want that kind of behavior. So I want enemies to be able to attack tiles that have enemies in them, but in my AI, I don't want enemies to choose to attack tiles that already have enemies on them. That was kind of a complicated thing to explain, but I hope that made sense. So the other thing I have on my level manager is a bunch of random actions. So this is just kind of responsible for giving or kind of dishing out what goes into these randomized action cards. So this is just like a list I can kind of pre-populate right now, where this is kind of like a pool of actions, which is going to be repeated over and over. But then if I go into debug mode, which shows like all the kind of hidden private information, so it's generated a pool or a little kind of temporary list of the same actions, and then it's going to pull one out of the pool each time I use one of these. So I hit forward. If I hit this card right here, it's going to pull either weight down, up, forward, or forward, and replace that with one of those. So I do that, replaced it with up. So now up's gone from this list, and that shrunk down to only 4 instead of 5. Once I go through them all, that goes down one by one until it's empty, and then it'll refresh that list again and pull them all back in. So in my original version of the game, which was Confused Rogue, so anyone who's just joined, and I'll just recap that. This was like a little kind of prototype I made a few years ago, and I'm now doing a slightly bigger version of that, but not massively changed. This was really just kind of like fully random. It would just give you anything from a list of actions, and it was fully possible for you to get like the same thing many times in a row because it didn't really know what it had already given you. Whereas now I'm trying to be a little bit smarter about it, and I'm kind of like keeping track of them so that you don't get like given the same thing over and over and over again. It's always sort of evenly distributed. There's a bunch of stuff I want to do with this and make it look a lot nicer. So right now it's just kind of like you just click one and then it just gets swapped out instantly. I want to show what's coming up next because I think that could be a useful little strategy tool. And then like when you use one, let's say use the one on the left, that will sort of like disappear off the screen. And then these two will like slide over to the left. And then there'll be like a gap here, and then whatever's coming up next will like slide into that gap. So it's going to be like a little queue that just gets like shuffled down all the way to the left each time. Kind of like, I don't know. You know what I mean? Stuff getting pushed through. Oh, by the way, I have my dog right here, and he's very, very sleepy. Yes, he is. I completely forgot he was here. He's just been asleep on my lap the whole time. Okay, so so that's that. I've got my player who. So there's just a couple of scripts on the player. One is kind of like a I guess like a kind of manager script, the same as I have with the level. This just like performs all the actions basically, and then I have another one which is just the input script. So this is just like constantly checking to see which key's pressed. If actually this is completely obsolete now. I just realized. When I first started out, I didn't have these clickable buttons. I had it just on the arrow keys. So I will not talk about that script because it's redundant. So then I also have the enemy script. You'll notice that the player and the enemy script, if I put them side by side, let's chuck another inspector tab in there, lock one, and then click on the enemy. You see they've got like a lot of the same variables or properties. That's because they, as I mentioned before, they inherit from the base GPI class. Doggo is life. Very stinky life though, unfortunately. Thank you. Yeah, I haven't really seen another game that does it quite like this. So that's kind of cool thing to pursue, I think. It seems to be something that kind of like sticks well when I was working on Switch and Shoot. Like being able to talk about a core mechanic like this is quite useful for like getting people interested in the game. So when I come up with something that is kind of new and interesting, then I'll try and stick with it and explore it. So, thank you very much. There's an update for Switch and Shoot that I've got ready to push to Steam pretty soon. So in Switch and Shoot, I wasn't coding everything in C# like this. I was using a visual scripting tool, and it was doing the job, but it was kind of slow and limited and hard to iterate on. So I started learning how to code in C# about a year ago, and maybe about 6 months ago was decided to like rebuild Switch and Shoot from scratch in C#, and I'm pretty much done with that. It's been on and off in that time, but yeah, it's kind of done, and it's like amazingly smoother. I found some weird bad ways of doing things that I was doing in the old scripting system, so I ripped all that out, and it's feeling much better. So I'm pretty excited to get that out. I'm not too sure what to actually get started on in this. I guess let's see. I guess I could delve into the AI, or I could do some basic animation. Is there anything you'd want to see me do? Like, yeah, I think my next two big steps is fixing that enemy AI so that they don't attack each other, or adding some animation to characters just so it's a little bit clearer what they're doing at each stage of the way. Because right now they're just kind of like when an enemy attacks, their target just disappears. So some animation would help. So which of those two would be useful, do you think? Which would you like to see? I will get started on the code in the meantime. Okay, animation. All right, I'll do that. There's a bunch of stuff I need to do, kind of to set up to get animation working. So I'll jump into that first. It's a little bit of code and a little bit of just kind of raw Unity, I guess. So I'll show you how I do that. So first of all, we need an animator. Anything that wants to animate needs an animator component. You can use the old animation component, but it's a lot more limited. It's just like if you use animation, you have to kind of handle all the state machine yourself. You have to like tell it what animation to play when, whereas if you use Animator, you've got like a whole state machine system built in, and you can do a lot more, much more easily. It's pretty powerful. So next thing we need is an animation controller. I haven't got any animation yet, so I'm going to make a little folder here. Oh, here's a quick little tip. If in I guess any Unity project, I recommend making another folder in your assets folder for all of the stuff that you make. I call mine like _ project assets, so it goes up at the top. And then like animation, art, audio, like everything you make for the project, stick in that folder. The reason I do that is because whenever you import a plugin, like a third-party plugin or asset, it just goes into the root assets folder, and that can get really messy trying to find all your stuff. Trying to find like all of, like if I just had the, say, the art folder here, wait, what? Like if I start adding more plugins, one goes here, like I've now got to kind of look through way more folders to find my art folder. Whereas if it's in here, I know I just look at the top of this list, in there is art. So that is something I've started doing on every project recently, and it's really, really helpful. So where was I? Okay, so my player has an animator, and it needs an animator controller. So I'm going to make a new asset, an animator controller, and I'm going to call that character, let's say player controller. So this is just an asset which handles all the state machine for that character, or for any character in that case, for that matter. So I drop that in there. Now, the animator is currently empty, so we need to give it some states. So what I'll do is I'll create an empty state, and this is going to be idle. And by default, it's going to go into that state because I've only got one. If I make another state, it's gray. So like all these are gray because they're not being used as the default. But this state doesn't actually have any. Whoops, sorry. I'm just making a mess of my dashboard right here. I don't use Twitch very much, so I'm still trying to figure out what's the best kind of layout for me to use. All right, so okay, I've got my player character over here, and he needs an animation clip. So the animator is basically, if you think about it, as like a brain for any animated object, and it kind of handles all the transitions between different animations. Whereas an animation is an actual little clip of something moving, say for example a walk loop, a walk cycle, or like a single punch animation. We can plug all those into the animator. You have to say it in that ridiculous way because otherwise you just get confused, you get mixed up. That's a real problem, trust me. So in animation, I'm going to create an animation called player idle. Now I just remembered that when I do that, it automatically adds that as a state. So I'm gonna delete that, and instead I'm going to plug that animation I just made into the state I made before. Now I'm just going to really quickly add something to this animation. So there's a few different ways you can do this, but I'm just going to go sprite. I'm going to get the sprite renderer and just going to flip the X. That's like, so I've added that as a track. That's like a property that we're going to be animating over time in this animation. Sorry, I'm gonna turn off my pop-ups on. Oh, I'm just gonna quit TweetDeck because it's kind of distracting. So I'm going to add a keyframe to this animation, which is changing the flip X state to false. So what that means is, like, over time, flip X is going to be true, and then when it gets to here, it's going to go false, and then that's just going to loop, so it's going to go true, false. So basically, he's just going to look left and right constantly like this. That's just literally mirroring the sprite on the horizontal axis. So if I hit play, he should just do that straight away because that uses that's in his default animation state. So I've got the character selected. I can see that it's just looping through that state right now, and he is playing it. Now what I want to do is add another animation. So I'm going to create a new clip. I'm going to call it player step. I call it player step forward. And the sprite, I'm going to animate the sprite. I'm going to animate its scale. Am I? Yeah, let's do the scale. So you notice that my movement is actually instantaneous. When I click forward, he just teleports to this square here. So go 3, 2, 1, bonk. And then I just play like a little dust cloud behind him. It just makes it really snappy. I may make it actually kind of transition over time, you know, like smoothly. But for now, I'm kind of okay with it just bonk, snapping like this. I like it to be like fast and punchy. So what I'm going to do is basically once he does that step, when he's reached the next tile, I'm going to add like a little kind of bounce, like wobbly sort of animation to the sprite. So it's like he's kind of like on, and then like a spring kind of reaction. I haven't explained that very well, but you'll see when I do it. So it's 1 second long. It starts at scale 111, which is where he was to begin with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a keyframe here, and I'm gonna. So right now we're in. Oh, we're not. we're in record mode. So that means that anything which I do now is going to be recorded onto the animation track. So I can kind of go ahead and just let's see, scale him down like this, and then I can go a little bit further into the timeline, and I can scale him back up, and then further still, he's going to eventually come back to 1. So if I just play that, it's kind of slow. Let's yeah, that's probably just needs to be way quicker actually. Yeah, it just needs to be like a boing. So one thing that does annoy me with Unity is that you can't just kind of play an animation once in the preview mode. I haven't found a way to do that anyway. So like, if an animation is intended to just be played once, it's really hard to actually like preview that. I'll tell you what, I'm gonna actually just move that. I've got a directional light in the scene and it's just in the same position as him, and it doesn't need to be, so I'm just going to move that so we can see what we're doing a little better. So, boom, boom. Right, okay. I'm just going to check my curves for that as well. So, So the dope sheet is basically like, just shows you where things happen in the timeline, whereas the curves give you more of a visual representation of like how the data is changing over time. I want this to be pretty quick. And that all looks good. But one thing I do want to do is so he's kind of so he's scaling by like the center of the sprite, which is not what I want. I want him to kind of like squash down from the top. So what I might do is just give him like a little root, a root object which kind of anchors him, and then just scale that. I guess that would probably work. He doesn't have a name right now. I'm kind of using him as a placeholder, and he'll probably be replaced with like something more humanoid. Maybe, I don't know yet. He needs to be able to carry a ball eventually, so he needs like arms or something. He's also going to be like one of many. There's going to be like a whole bunch of slaves lined up who are being sort of thrown into the gladiator pit. So like there would be many names, and so I'll probably just use my random name generation that I used in Switch and Shoot again, and give it some different presets. Okay, so I'm just gonna really quickly try something. So I'm gonna give the sprite a root, kind of like or maybe an anchor is a better name for it. So that's gonna go into there as a child, and what that means is when okay, perfect. So the sprite was at 0.5 on Y, so it's actually raised up from where the player position is, which is on the floor. The position of the sprite is in the center. Yeah, he is the ball. Oh, maybe he should be the ball. Maybe like you're trying to take an egg to the other end of the pitch without it breaking. I don't know. I kind of want you to be able to throw it, and it would definitely break if you threw it. Like I want to be able to use it as a weapon. Um, oh, I don't know. Yeah, like a contact sport with eggs is just sounds like a mess. But that could be good. So where was I? Okay. So what was happening was when I scale the sprite object itself, it's scaling from the center, which means it kind of the bottom gets pulled up as well. And that's not what I want. I want it to scale from the base, like the bottom of it. So when it goes up and down, it stretches like this. So that way it's kind of like I can get them to kind of go boing, boing, boing. So that animation that I just made, I need to adjust it so that it actually, okay, let's see if I can get this right. I'm sure there's a way to do this, but I forget the actual syntax you need to use. So I'm going to animate the anchor instead of the sprite, and then the sprite's going to move with it because it's a child. Let's just add that in really quick. Oh, right, I don't need the sprite bit in there. So you can just, if you need to modify a game object, it actually breaks all the references to the animations because they're referenced by name. Oh man, do you know what? I'm doing it in the wrong one. How do you do it? Yeah, they're referenced by name, so if you change the name, it breaks all the animations, but then you can just rename it. It took me like years to learn this. You click one of these, you can just hit F2 and then just rename it and fix the reference yourself, but it needs like a certain syntax to it, and I forget what that is. Flip X. Oh, okay, I was adding that kind of wrong. Oh, that's just okay. I'm just making it again, basically, right now. Okay, so we go sprite anchor scale. If I'd put in if I'd put in like way more data into this animation, I would definitely be trying to figure out a a way to repair what I just broke. But I've only got like one keyframe, so or one set of keyframes. So I'm just going to redo it. So I can go in ahead and add the keyframes in the same places because I know that the timings were fine. And then I'll just do that. Oh man, I wasn't recording. Squash and stretch and wait. Oh man, I was doing the player because I had the player selected. Okay. Animation sucks. Okay, so sprite anchor, that's selected definitely now. Okay, so we'll go to the next keyframe, we'll scale that down. Okay, that's working. I wondered why it wasn't updating the actual values, but there we go. So if I play that, there we go. So he kind of, when he lands, he's going to go straight down into that, and then he's going to like bounce back up, and then he's going to rest. In fact, he probably wants to come down a little bit further again, like so he's got like a little bit of a wobble. So he goes, whoa. yeah, just up a little bit at the end there. And then he probably wants to, oh, I can kill all those now because I've replicated the data that I was trying to replicate. When he comes down, he probably wants to, squash outwards as well, so that it's like boing. So it looks really squidgy. And then when he goes up, he's gonna squish in a bit, not too much, and then he's gonna come down and go out just a teeny bit, and then back up to normal. There we go. So just kind of trying to sort of conserve the overall mass. So when he like squashes down on Y, he gets pushed out on X. Okay. Boing. Okay, that's pretty satisfying. So then, what I want to do next is I've got my two animation states in the animator, but I need a way of actually connecting them, and I need a way of telling them like when to start, essentially. So there's again a few different ways you can do that, but what I like to do is use the parameters. Parameters you can think of as like a set of conditions for changing state. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a transition from idle to my step forward state, and I'm going to first of all I'm going to turn off has exit time, because we don't care what the time stamp is of the idle animation when we make this transition. We just want to play it straight away as soon as the conditions are met. We want to keep a fixed duration of 0, so like it's basically going to go through this transition. You can think of as like another little timeline. So here we could say it takes like 1 second to get from this state to this state, and in that time it's going to kind of blend between them. But we don't want that in this case, because it's supposed to be really snappy. So I'm just going to set the transition duration to 0. Next, I need to add a condition, but to do that we need some parameters. So I'm going to add, there's a few different things you can use here, but I want a trigger, and that is going to be called step forward. So I can then add that condition, that parameter, into the conditions of the transition. And if I wanted to, I could add more. So like I could add a boolean here, and like that could be, like it checks that all of these are true. So it's only going to go through this transition if all these conditions are met. So I could have that be like this boolean has to be true, or it has to be false, or whatever I want. But right now we just want a simple trigger, so I can kill that. And then we're going to set that trigger in code when the player does the action. But then we also want to make sure that we come back into idle state. And this one's going to be a little bit different. This one does want to look at the exit time, because I want to play that when this animation finishes. So another way of putting that is the time stamp of this animation state matters for the transition into another state. And the exit time I want is 1. So that means like when it gets to, so on a scale of 0 to 1, when it gets to the end of the animation, or when it's transition. Then again, the fixed duration I'm just going to set to 0, because I want it to be snappy and poppy. It's not like a rigged 3D mesh character. It's just a sprite, a set of sprite frames. So we want them to snap into different states really pretty quickly. And then the conditions are, we don't care. Like it doesn't matter what the character's doing. Once he's finished his step animation, he just wants to go back to idle. So a couple of other things I might want to just set is I just want to turn off loop on the step animation so that it doesn't loop. Okay, so now on my player, I'm just going to apply the prefab again because I made some changes to the hierarchy. And I'm going to go into code land. So this character now needs a reference to its animator component so that we can tell that animator to do stuff. But I'm actually going to do that on the base GPI component, which is going to be shared by the player and it's going to be shared by enemies. We want them all to use animation eventually, so I'll just put it in this base class and then they will all inherit that behavior. Just to anyone who doesn't know what that means, GPI is my base class here, and there's another class which inherits GPI, so it means it basically uses everything that's in the GPI class for itself and considers itself a GPI as well. Then, like, my player inherits from character. So if you think of it as like a chain, character inherits GPI, player inherits character. So like they are a hierarchy really, or not a hierarchy, like it's like a subset. You know, player is a type of character, which is a type of GPI. So all my GPIs want to be able to animate. So I need to give them a reference to an animator component. So first of all, I'll declare that, and I don't want it to be public, but I do want it to be visible in the inspector. So I'm going to do serialize field. When I come back here, that should pop up when it's done compiling. And there it is. And now if I also look on my my enemy, because that inherits the character class as well, then that's also got the animator, even though it uses the enemy script instead of the player script. So then I want to drag my animator into there. You could do this on awake. You could just get the player to kind of, or the script to like find get component and get that component off, you know, at runtime. But I like to just do it in the inspector because you know that it's definitely got that reference, and you know that well, it's just saving a little bit of processing time, like not a lot, but if you're instantiating 1,000 objects, if they've already got their references, then you don't need to run get component and find that reference. So then, whenever the object moves, so I've already got a method set up here for when any GPI moves. So player will use that, enemy will use that. It does all its stuff, and then I also want to tell it to play the animation. So if first I want to just check that the animator reference isn't null, because if we haven't set this yet on the enemies, we don't want it to spit out errors. Then we're going to get the animator and we're going to set the trigger. And that wants the trigger name, which was, if I go back to here, step forward. So I'll just copy that, paste it into there. That's that. So all that does is when I run through this bit of code, on the animator that's attached, I set the trigger named step forward, and that will kind of turn on like that, and that means that this transition's conditions are met, and it's going to run through there into that animation state, and then when it finishes, these conditions will be met, and it's going to go back to idle, and it will also clear that automatically. So if I hit play, that should just work. Yeah, it did. Boom. There we go. Boom. Now it does it on every direction, which maybe we don't want. But for now it's fine. You know, I could add some different states for like sidestepping left and right, but right now just a basic single kind of movement step animation just does the job. I'll tell you what though, I am gonna just extend the downwards bit a little because you didn't really see it, and I'm also gonna just make it kind of get to that a little bit snappier. I tell you what, actually, I want it to go into that sooner, but I want to keep it in that position a little bit longer. So I'm going to duplicate those keyframes, and then if I look at the scale here, it's going to go boom, boom. Okay, I probably don't want that to be like quite so. Maybe I want to kill those keyframes. Something like, I wanted to spend more time in that kind of squashed down state, because that's like, I think, the sort of emphasis point before it springs back up. Boom. So it's really like, it's kind of hopped and squished down into the ground, and then it sort of springs back up and comes back to normal. So the squished down bit is the bit I want to focus on. There we go, that's a bit better. Boom. Okay, it's looking alright. Now what I might do really quickly to show you how you can kind of easily reuse that is I might just drop a sprite onto the enemies and basically set up the same thing for them on their prefab. And to do that, I'm gonna just grab the sprite I used in my other project. Sprites. I'm gonna use this guy for the enemies right now. Okay. Alright, so this is just some debug meshes really. But I'm gonna give him a sprite, and I'm gonna set it to that enemy. I'm gonna reset the color to white so that it's not tinted. I'm gonna move it up a little. So I basically just want to I'm just throwing in a placeholder right now of a sprite I drew for another project. And I'm going to kind of copy that behavior onto this one as well. So let's give them all that. So we'll give them an animator as well. Apply that. Assign the animator into there before I forget, otherwise we get null reference errors. So should that not show the animations I already made? Oh, I don't have the controller assigned. Yeah, so there we go, that will just reuse all the same animations. So because I named the game objects the same thing, sprite anchor and sprite, the animations all can reference them by name, and they just work, they do the same stuff. So I can use that same animation on an enemy. Boing, boing. And then I think that's it actually. I mean, I probably want to rename this stuff, but I don't need to. Let's see. Oh, I left an enemy in there. He shouldn't be there. So if I move now, are they? Yeah, they are doing it. Cool. Like, obviously it looks kind of weird having this peg stick out of the front of them. That's going to be replaced for some other kind of visualization. But yeah, poof, it works. There we go. So what you can do? Oh, thank you very much. What you can do is like I might want to give different animations to my enemies, but still use the same state machine. I'm just going to rename that so it doesn't say player, it just says step forward, because player is not really relevant. So I'm going to genericize this now. So I have a character controller, and all that really cares about is like hang on, I can't talk and type at the same time. Let me just tidy this up really quick. So I'm gonna make basically all these animations more generic, so that they can be kind of used on any character as a default, but then I can kind of swap them out and override them for specific types of characters. So it's a really good starting point if I want to create a new character type and just have it work and use all these animations, but then I can kind of later on go and like tailor each individual type a little bit more specifically, like you know, to make them unique. So a way that you can do that is using an animator override controller. And what that is basically like it's another animator controller, but it inherits from an animator controller in the same way that the script I was showing earlier inherits from another class. You can kind of inherit all the states and transitions and conditions. So what I'll do, character controller, let's call it character animator, and player animator. So player animator is going to inherit from character animator. So I'll drop that in there. And what that does is then show me that it's got all these states and I need to plug stuff into them. So if I wanted to, I could just go like character idle, character step forward, and it's just going to use the same, drop that in there. It's going to use all the same animations, right? So like, well, my dog's pulling on the cable of my headset. In fact, I'll pull my headset off. Okay. So he's still going to work because he's inheriting the same animations that I made earlier. But what I can do is duplicate them both. Call this player idle and player step forward. And then in my player animator, I can override them and assign new animations, right? And then the player in my scene, he's now using player idle and player step forward instead of character idle and character step forward. So if I wanted to now, I could add like let's just add like a really quick rotation to the sprite just to demonstrate that like he's going to use his own animations. So I'm just going to rotate the Z like 360 degrees. So that's his animation. And the enemies, because they're still using the character animator class controller, if I'm right here, they still use that. So So they're not going to be adjusted. Wait, what? Player idle. Why is that not working? Player animator, player idle. Oh, I know why. Rotation was a bad idea. Because they get rotated by script to always face the camera. It's not going to work. So what I'll do is just, well, I'll flip his Y up and down as well. So you can see him like flipping up and down like that. And then he will be using that animation and they won't. So that's like a really cool way you can kind of set up one animator controller and then just reuse it for a bunch of different characters. Okay, so I think I'm probably gonna call it there. I've been going for about an hour, but I'm gonna be working on this more soon, and I will do some more live streaming. So thank you for coming to hang out. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe, and don't forget to follow me everywhere on Twitter and on Tumblr and on Instagram and on the street. No, don't follow me on the street. But yeah, I'll probably do some more tomorrow, and I'll put out a tweet and everything to let you know. Yeah, it took a while to set up today for the first time, but I'll be able to hit the ground running tomorrow. So cool. Yeah, thanks for dropping in, and I'll see you later. Bye bye.